He survived on a 5-pound bag of rice and marine life foraged from the sea. But as was the trend for McCandless, he once again grew restless. On January 18th, Chris attempted to pass back into the United States without identification, and he was apprehended by immigration authorities. He spent a night in jail, and the police confiscated his .38 caliber Colt Python handgun, but Chris was released the next day. For 6 weeks, Chris roamed across the Southwest. He wandered and hitchhiked from Houston to the Pacific coast. Though Chris's spirits were high, he'd lost 25 pounds and was suffering from malnutrition. Chris's journeys were taking their toll, so he settled down to rest and recuperate in his next semi-permanent residence, Las Vegas. There he got a job at an Italian restaurant, and he entirely stopped his journal entries. We don't know much about the specific circumstances, but McCandless left Las Vegas in May 1991 and arrived at Bullhead City, Arizona in October. Bullhead became perhaps the most permanent home Chris occupied since leaving college. He had a full-time job at McDonald's, he opened a savings account, and he commuted to work on a bicycle. Chris applied to the job with his real name and social security number. He began squatting in an abandoned trailer near the city. The trailer, though empty, was furnished, had electric sockets, and made for a reasonable home for Chris. In the years that followed his death, his managers and co-workers generally spoke highly of Chris McCandless. They said he was a good worker, dependable, and amicable enough. However, they also noted he had an absent, almost spacey affect about him. After clocking out, Chris didn't spend time with his co-workers. Even during idle workday conversations, he simply waxed on and on about nature and his travels, specifically about his newest plan, a journey to Alaska. And indeed, when he left Bullhead, Chris had only one destination in mind. Of course, Chris didn't immediately make it to Alaska. He had very little money, and further, Chris believed that taking a plane up north would be cheating. So he made his way to a place called Slab City in Southern California. Once a Navy base, but long since abandoned, Slab City was, and still is, a grid of concrete foundations in the middle of the desert. It's a sort of makeshift town of vagabonds, anarchists, drifters, and criminals on the run. The slabs were also home to regular swap meets, where denizens and people in the surrounding areas set up booths to sell second-hand goods. McCandless got a job working in one of these booths and did well to ingratiate himself into the community. He became quite close with his employers and their friends, though Chris was still unwavering. Most of his conversation circled endlessly around his Alaskan voyage. Chris was too substantive in these plans. Every morning he trained physically for the perils of the Alaskan wilderness. He studied survival strategies and traded ideas with the denizens of the slabs. And so he soon hitchhiked out of Slab City. Chris's next stop was Carthage, South Dakota. There McCandless worked as a farmhand. He wasn't particularly skilled on the farm, but Chris was willing to throw himself at grunt work. He was tenacious and was perfectly happy to handle projects that no one else really wanted to do. McCandless spent his days cleaning warehouses, exterminating pests, painting buildings, and pulling weeds. Still, he spent his free time on his Alaskan plans. He continued to study survival. He sought advice from hunters and survivalists in Carthage. Chris had resolved to hunt for his food in Alaska, so he learned everything he could in Carthage about stalking game, butchering animals, and curing meat for preservation. On April 15th, his friends and co-workers on the farm gathered to see Chris on his way. McCandless had a heavy backpack, $1,000 in his boot, and not much else. Chris's plan was to return to Carthage and work at that same farm after he was finished in Alaska. He left his journal and photo album with the farm's owners for safekeeping. But when the farmers hugged him goodbye, something seemed amiss. According to one account, "I noticed he was crying. That frightened me. He wasn't planning on being gone all that long. I figured he wouldn't have been crying unless he intended to take some big risks and knew he might not be coming back." That's when I started having a bad feeling that we wouldn't ever see Chris again. National parks like those in Alaska are constantly coming under threat. Recently, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum directed America's national parks to remain open despite massive budget cuts and layoffs. One way to keep up with our national park system is Ground News. Ground News is a website and app that helps you develop better news habits and get a more honest, well-rounded view of the world. They gather articles from over 50,000 sources so you can compare how different news outlets are reporting the same story. Ground News has a suite of tools that detect political bias, reliability, and even who funds a given news outlet. These ratings are all backed by independent news monitoring organizations, so you can trust that Ground News itself isn't just another thing you need to decode. Follow along at ground.news/horses. Taking a look at this national parks story, some have categorized the mandate as a way for the administration to save face, as staffing shortages could lead to shorter hours and safety risks. On Ground News, you can see that 74% of the publications reporting on this mandate are center-leaning, with 97% rated as high factuality. This tells me that the story is very much based in fact, rather than being motivated by partisan ideology. I love Ground News' ownership tool. Giant media conglomerates control the news, and so they truly shape the world we live in. With the ownership tool, you can see who is making money off the news you are consuming. It even breaks down